What's up, everybody? I'm really excited to be joined by Johann from Tonder today. He's a conversion rate optimization expert, and we've had a couple of really interesting conversations in the past. I really like enjoying talking with him, and I think this is a really important conversation to have. So today we're going to talk about the compounding effect of decisions and how being able to make better decisions over time is really going to be the make or break for your business. And without further ado, I will just give like a really brief introduction, but then I'm gonna have him talk about his journey himself. So really quick background from my side. They help big corporations, big companies like Nike, like Canon and Interflora with conversion optimization, with testing and experimentation, and also with making better decisions. So, Johann, can you please take a minute before we jump into the presentation, just kind of talking about your journey, what you did in the past, and also how you have these, these are really well-known companies with conversion rate optimization.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. It's good to see you again. My journey into CRO is not the usual one, what I hear from other people. I started in corporate many years ago. And I was, at one point, I was in charge of a unit, like a labs environment, and we were given a number of stagnating businesses, so e-businesses. And this was the beginning of the internet, sort of early 2000s, straight after the dot-com, the dust from the dot-com bubble was still settling around us. And my brief was to either fix them, kill them, or sell them, handful of e-businesses, e-commerce and subscription and a number of things. And I did what people in corporate do with big budgets, with lots of money. I hired expensive agencies, gurus, went to conferences. I would throw money at anyone able to give me some information and give me some advice. And I would do everything that they told us to do. And we had mixed results, sort of one step forward, two step back kind of thing. And then I started taking a completely different approach, and it was almost out of desperation. Started talking to customers and just understanding the world of the customer. And frankly, I don't even know if at that time I knew what I was doing, but it was kind of, the last resort. And then we started acting on what we heard from customers. GA, Google Analytics was brand new, so we were all over that. And I was an early adopter of that. So we had that layer of behavioral data, and then on top of this customer data. And suddenly, Carl, we started seeing real results. Things started happening. And when I say real results, I didn't mean sessions and page views and stuff like that. I mean actual pounds and dollars and, real money on the top line. And that's when I discovered the power of this. At the same time, Optimizely launched just towards my end of my corporate career. I was one of the first users of Optimizely. I learned about experimentation in university, but never really thought I would ever apply that one day. I was never going to be a scientist in a lab. I knew that. So I thought, this is not something I'll ever use. Optimizely came along, and up until then, we were sort of hacking together experiments, and suddenly we had this tool. Then I left corporate, and I joined a business, an e-commerce business, and they had about 6 months to 12 months of runway left. So it was a good brand, it was a very strong brand, but they needed drastic change in order to not just survive, but to thrive. And I felt that applying what I just learned, this power of data, we'll give it a shot. And again, the results were absolutely amazing. We were able to turn that around, turn it into a break-even situation very quickly, from there into profitability, and eventually exited that. And it's never as simple as just one thing, but one of the major factors there was what we today call CRO, is understanding the world of the customer, what makes them buy, what makes them not buy, what makes them buy from competitors, what goes on in the mind of a consumer when they make that purchase decision, and then marrying that with the behavioral data just one last bit less about me now, Carl, but I think this is a really important point to make, that when we talk about data, firstly, we all have too much data, right? We don't have we don't have enough time, enough resources, enough tools to be able to really plow through all the data we've got. And when we're in the industry, when we talk about data, typically it's a synonym for quantitative data. That's what we have lots of. That is incredibly useful. We absolutely need it. It shows us the behavior, but this is the key thing. And I know you have a background in psychology too. And what really is important to understand is that those graphs and those metrics and all those beautiful numbers you're looking at in GA and Shopify and Adobe, wherever you're looking at, it's the outcome of human behavior. Your conversion rate is the result of people buying and not buying, or clicking a button or not clicking the button. You're measuring human behavior. And what we try to do as conversion optimizers is we don't try to increase the conversion rate. You and I can't increase the conversion rate. It is what it is. You're looking in the rearview mirror, even when you run a test. It is what it is. You can't change it. You can't put your finger on it and change it. It measures the outcome of user behavior. What you and I can do is shape user behavior. And the only way you can shape user behavior is if you understand user behavior. The only way you can understand user behavior is if you get into the minds of your consumers. And so absolutely, there's no other way around this. You need to have that qualitative voice of customer component marrying on top of this, all these graphs and metrics. You gave me a minute and I took 5.
Great point you just made. It's like, it's really easy to look at all of these numbers and graphs and statistics and spreadsheets all day long, right? But what I was also found when I was studying psychology is that I always felt like the statistics and the numbers, they didn't really mirror like human behavior and what's going on in the mind. Like, it's so difficult to write down on a piece of paper and some sort of statistics what's going on in the mind, right? And then I always felt like while I was studying it that some element is missing, right? It's like what you were talking about, the qualitative data, the voice of the customer, and really getting into their mind and understanding their feelings and emotions, and not just being too quantitative data driven and too focused on the numbers, but rather on their behavior and how you can tweak it. So thank you so much for the introduction. You have a really, really great topic today. Shall we jump into that?
Let's jump into it.
Sweet.
Find the right buttons to press. Right. I assume you can see my screen. I assume it's all right. Yeah, Carl?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So this is, as Carl said, we've had a few chats and talk about all kinds of topics, and there's so much to talk about. And I want to try and hone in on this one subtopic, the compound effect of decisions. And as I go through the talk, it'll become clear why that is an area of focus that I pull out. The graph that you see here, let's start there. This shows the difference in performance, and it's stock price, share price, the difference in performance between two different sets of organizations. As you can see there, the experimenters, the people of the organizations that have adopted an experimentation culture, that do a lot of experiments, A/B tests and other experiments, they find themselves on that sexy graph. They ride that wave at the top there, the one where I'm sure everyone on this call would like to be. And then there's the other graph as well, right? That's the rest. And really the difference, this is according to Bloomberg and Harvard, who've done studies on this. And this is the difference between the two. It's that adopting an experimentation culture versus not. And I think throughout the talk and throughout the next few slides, it'll become clear why that may be the case. Now, this story, this guy here is David Brailsford. It's become a famous story, but I'll take 3 to 4 minutes just to give you the summary of it. This guy turned around the fortunes of the British cycling team in the early 2000s. In fact, the British cycling team was absolutely nowhere. That's not even true. It's being generous. They were pathetic. They were dismal. And that had gone on for 100 years, right? So you can look at all the stats, all the big races to understand just how bad it was. But I think for me, always, the best illustration of just how bad they were is that one of the main cycle manufacturers, one of the big brands, refused to sell their gear to the British cyclists because they didn't want their brand to be associated with that level of performance. So things were pretty bad. This guy walks in, and he, within a few years, at the next Olympic events, I think they won 60% of all the gold medals, something like that, and then continued to dominate the scene after that. Now, that's a remarkable story, but what's even more interesting is, and this is where it starts becoming slightly relevant for us, is the way in which he did it. So he started up by saying, well, what's our goal? Right? We've got this big, audacious goal, which is to go from not nowhere, but go from pathetic to being somewhere on the world scene, dominating the next Olympics. How do we do that? How do we make that happen? And so he took this concept of cycling performance. And he said, how do we improve cycling performance? Where do we even start? And so he broke it down, cycling and cycling performance, into its minutest constituents, into the small parts that make up cycling. And he set out to improve each of those parts by just 1%. Now, there were hundreds of parts to improve, and I'm not going to bore you with the detail. If you're interested in this, in fact, do yourself a favor and go and Google the story afterwards, and you'll see some of the stuff that he did that related to the bicycle components, the tires, the gears, etc., the clothing, but also what they ate, how they slept, everything that could go into cycling performance. Now, you look at this and you go, wow, 1%, that's almost nothing. But the point is, if you put those almost nothings together, then you have something. And, well, the results speak for themselves. And this is a concept also that many of you will recognize. James Clear wrote a book, Tiny Habits, and he speaks about exactly the same thing. So just 1% improvement each day in habits and decisions. And this is where it segues into what I want to talk about today. James, in his book, says that 1% improvement each day, by the end of the year, you'll have 37% better improvement because of that compound effect. But that also works against you. So the more better decisions you make, the better it's going to be at the end of that year. But the more less good decisions you make, that's going to work against you. And this is the point I often make to people. That's what experimentation and CRO really is about. If you look at your financial statements in a year from now, it's really the result, the outcome of every decision you make today, tomorrow, next week, and so on. The more good decision you've made, the better the results, and the opposite is also true. And that's where CRO and experimentation can really help you. And there's a concept, and we'll come back to it. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but the expected value of information, EVI. And really what it says is that when you have high uncertainty, and we operate at the moment in a world characterized by extreme uncertainty, unprecedented levels of uncertainty. But even without that, business is uncertain, right? You cannot predict the future. The data that you have is always backward looking. It's always looking in the rearview mirror. It only takes you so far in terms of moving forward. And again, that's where experimentation really helps. But the theory of EVI, expected value of information, says that you don't need perfect information. You actually, you can figure out what is perfect information, what it's going to cost you, but that's not where you want to be. And it comes back to the concept of MVP. MVP really is the following. What is that thing that I need to learn right now in my business? And what is the cheapest, quickest way to learn that? It's not necessarily an A/B test. Maybe it's a phone call to some customers. Maybe it's some usability testing. And so there are all these methods, all these research methods, all these validation methods that build on each other and eventually you get to A/B testing, which is the best form of making that decision. But the broad point I'm trying to make here is that you want to add some information into your decision making so you can make better decisions every day. And you don't want that information to be limited to your experience, your intuition, your gut, and backward-looking data, because you're going to get it wrong a lot of the time. And this is there's decades of data that support that. So here's a quick case study, also a famous story. This is M&S Mark and Spencer, big store in the UK, chain of stores, high street retailer. They spent 2 years, £115 million redesigning their website. And this was it. And when they launched it, go on.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, but you've seen this before. You've seen this movie. I've seen it. When they launched this redesign, conversion rate tanked, sales tanked. The CEO went on stage and apologized to shareholders, blaming the website. Now, Carl, I'm sure you've seen this as well. A lot of clients that come to us, when they first approach us, it's exactly the same story. Help! We redesigned our site and suddenly sales have dropped. Now, could you have prevented that? Of course, you could have prevented it. It's, the stuff we've just spoken about. So each of these bars represents your belief in an idea. And what M&S did there is they launched a whole, with a relaunch, with a redesign. You've got all these different ideas wrapped into one. And this is what you think is going to happen, right? You think all these ideas are going to be positive, some less positive than others. But this is actually the reality. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, and the rest go nowhere. And again, there's decades of data that support this. You could look at the best teams in the world. They find that when they test their ideas, out of every 10 ideas they test, between 1 and 3 of those ideas will give them the expected desired effect. Now, if that's the best teams in the world, why would it be any different for you and me? My agency has been going for 10 years. We've been running controlled experiments online for 10 years, and I've seen this over and over again. So, this is the reality. So here we're now getting a step closer to experimentation and A/B testing. It could be anything. It could be conversion rate, it could be revenue. Let's call it revenue. And the graph is doing what graphs are meant to be doing, right? Tick up and to the right. You launched an update. That update could be, I don't know, a small change on your site. It could be a redesign. It could be a new product. It could be anything. But let's say it's in the context of CRO, typically it's a small update. And now you see that graph behaving very well. And before you crack open the champagne, tap yourself on the back, you wonder, how much credit can I actually take for this? Is it possible that other factors may have contributed here? We saw this recently with a pandemic, for example. Crazy numbers. And now they've kind of settled. So that would have been a factor. And had you run a controlled experiment where half of your visitors are still exposed to that old world without the update, then this is what you may have seen. Without the update, you would have made even more money. You've made things worse. And it's those hidden factors that contribute to this, that cause it. It could be, as I said, the pandemic. We saw a lot of this. It could be that your marketing department found some magic dust to sprinkle all over their campaigns, and suddenly the campaigns are performing better. It could be, and I saw this recently, that one of your competitors' site went down or they went out of business. And suddenly you get this influx of traffic and of people who have nowhere else to go. And that's what's causing this beautiful performance in your business. It's not the change that you made. And that's why you want to do controlled experiments as much as possible. And I say as much as possible because it's not relevant in all cases. And everyone doesn't have all the levels of traffic to test everything. I'm not a believer in test everything. I think some things must absolutely be tested, and some things, don't have to be tested. And also, you don't have the bandwidth to test it all. But certainly when you're dealing, I work mainly with larger organizations, and the larger you go, the more impact those decisions have, the bigger the traffic and what you have to work with, the more you want to be doing this. You want to be running at a high velocity. If you're running a smaller business with smaller traffic numbers, you want to certainly your bigger decisions and the bigger changes, you want to be able to test them. The rest, you want to validate in other ways. You don't want to rely on your gut, as I said before. This is a quote you may have seen before. I'll read it with you. Our success at Amazon is a function of how many experiments we do per year, per month, per week, per day. I know what's going on in your mind right now. You're thinking, well, I'm not Amazon. We're not Amazon. This is Jeff Bezos. Remember, Bezos started with nothing in the early 90s. How we built that business is through experimentation. Now, if you and I were to kick around some ideas for 5 minutes, if we were to have a quick chat about what is behind the success of Amazon, we would come up with a whole range of things, I'm sure. Experimentation would not be one of it. There's the guy himself saying this is what is behind the success of Amazon. Because we are making right decisions or good decisions, better decisions every time we make a decision. We accept we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong a lot of the time. And we won't know about it. But we'll get it right most of the time because of the science, because of this rigor that we use. And that really is what it's all about for me. So I'll give you one quick case study from our agency. This is a big brand. It's a car rental company. And Carl, I like to talk about negative tests. So this is an example. You see CRO people, and Carl and I are both quite active on Twitter, and we always have a bit of a joke about the winning test results that are shared on Twitter, and people talk about their wins a lot. The wins are great. We need them because that's how we get that curve. I'm far more excited by a losing test, because what it tells you is your process is right. Firstly, you've avoided that loss. Right, you've prevented something from hurting your sales. You've prevented the M&S scenario. But not only that, if you run a test and the metric is negative, what does it mean? It means you found a lever that has a major effect on customer behavior. You pulled it in the wrong direction. You just need to figure out how to pull it in the other direction. You've got your lever. Just figure out how to pull it now. So what I've often seen over 10 years is that some of our biggest wins have come out of negative tests. Where you run a test, you get this negative result, you start playing with that lever, and you stumble upon insights through running more tests. Those insights you could only have learned by running an experiment. There is no other way you could have come upon that insight. That is the value of testing. That's the value of CRO. So here's this checkout funnel. They were really keen on this. This was designed by a top agency in London. And when we tested it, we discovered that they would have lost £7 million in annualized revenue. It's not bad. It doesn't mean that agency did crap work. It doesn't mean that that the process is bad. It means the opposite. It means the process works. So what we were able to do was just to take this flow and start optimizing on top of that. Get it to a level where it's neutral, and then from there, optimizing further. And then here's where I'll leave it, Carl. Don't take any of the stuff that I preach from me. Take it from people like Harvard Business School. They've been very bullish over the last 10 years. One of the most influential publications, one of the most influential business and management journals, Harvard Business Review, been very consistently very bullish and optimistic about experimentation. And here's just one quote. I could throw many at you from one of their recent editions. Well, it's not a quote, but they say, test your assumptions, question your assumptions. Every business idea, in fact, every business is rooted in assumptions. Figure out how to test that assumption. a falsifiable hypothesis. In other words, you can prove yourself wrong. That's not always an A/B test. It could be customer interviews. It could be usability testing, and you build up to that A/B test. That's the best way of doing it. Run those experiments, produce hard evidence. Carl, that's then where I'll leave it.
Sweet. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really exciting and interesting to see. I have one follow-up question on that. From your perspective, and maybe you can also talk about the case with Interflora. How can these big corporate companies use testing and experimentation culture to stay relevant and stay at top of the zeitgeist for decades and decades and decades, even though maybe their business model or what they're doing wasn't digital in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, Interflora is an interesting one because they've been a long-standing client of ours, and it's as you say, it's a traditional business. They've been around for 100 years. They could have been disrupted by now. They're doing well. They're doing great work, and part of it comes down to that experimentation culture. And obviously, I can't give any figures. I can't give any sharing information that might be sensitive. But what I can say is that not only that brand, but many other brands we work with, brands that are out there in the in the public domain. This is really the way they look at experimentation and data is the way that I've been talking about. Professor Stefan Tomke from Harvard Business School, in his book, talks about the CFO, the financial decision maker, that the FD or the CFO getting to that point where they say, show me the experiment results, show me the data, show me the. So when you go to the senior management and you ask for budget, you ask for for support in an initiative in those corporates that do this well, that's how you defend it. It's not about creating a beautiful deck that makes a business case, that draws on market research and fancy graphs and expensive consultants. Where's the experiment? And what did the experiment show? And that's how we make our decisions. And also, Carl, I should say that those experiments in the mature companies are not run only offline. Well, let me remind us, I've already said this, but it's not just A/B tests. It's other forms of experiments as well. A/B test and that controlled online experiment where you have the variants running in parallel, that's certainly it's the best way to get that causal effect. So X leads to Y. You can't determine causality in any other way, so that's how you do it. But to get that validation, there are other forms of methodologies to get those that validation. So to give you some information to reduce the uncertainty in the ideas. So those organizations that have strong, mature experimentation cultures, they do all of that. They take this information, they feed it into their experimentation program. So they don't just throw spaghetti at the roof. They run ideas that are based on data, based on insights, observations that they've made. And they also apply, this is the second distinction, second point I want to make, is they also apply it offline. So a retailer we work with, for example, a big retailer, they've got an online presence, strong online presence, and increasingly so, but they also run experiments in their traditional stores using exactly the same rigor. There's a famous case study, I think it was Gap Jeans. They and we've done something similar where they tested the opening hours of different stores to find what is the best configuration, what's the most profitable. So to answer your question about how these brands remain relevant and how do you get to be on that curve? How do you get to be one of the organizations that rides that great wave that I showed on that first slide? It really is that. It's not about running tests. It's not about that. It's about making better decisions. Testing is a tool you use to make better decisions.
Yeah, thank you so much for making that point. And again, I think it's really, really important that you explain it, that testing is just like the technical way of doing that, right? It's just like a tool you can use. It's not the solution. It's just like the tool that you use to understand cause and effect. And what I also really enjoyed you pointing out again is that it's not only about adding up these winning tests, right? And making these better decisions. It's also about not making the bad decisions, right? And preventing those losses. So I think it's like a double positive effect, so to say, on like your compounding effect, because the bad decision making isn't working against it, right? You can prevent bad decisions from happening, and you can also compound the good decisions that you make.
Absolutely. And that's where that curve comes from. That sharp curve doesn't come from wins only. The reason the other companies are doing that is because they incorporate all those ideas, the bad ones in the good ones. And so they cancel each other out. So that's a really very important point. And I think there is an obsession with wins in CRO. CRO is all about wins. And I think it's, if that's the way you look at it, then you're never going to get the full power out of it. You're never going to get the full value out of it. A really good metric. So I'm not talking about test metrics here, and maybe that is something we should talk about, although that steps into the weeds a bit. But a program level metric, so how do you measure the performance of your CRO or experimentation program? There are all kinds of metrics. And I think in the context of CRO, typically it's going to be ROI or ROI related. But one metric, secondary metric perhaps, that I like to use is the percentage of statistically significant tests. So in other words, you want to, I don't care whether it's a win or a loss, as long as it's stat sig, as long as it's conclusive and you can really call it. What you want to avoid as much as possible is inconclusive tests, right? So the more inconclusive tests you have, you can't really make a decision on that. It doesn't really move you forward as much. It does give you some insight, but a losing test, as I explained earlier, really gives you a way forward. So that's one metric that I like to apply to really encourage teams to go bold and to make changes that will move the needle one way or the other, so we can learn from it.
Could you do me a quick favor also for the audience to quickly explain the concept of statistical significance, and also the concept of when do you like to say that something is a significant and valid result? And we saw this a lot happening in the past with inexperienced CRO people or inexperienced marketers, that they, for example, run a test for 2 days and then they put it into like a statistical significance calculator, for example, and it tells them it's 98% statistical significant. So I think it would be great if you could touch on that kind of, not too technical in terms of how much data you need or the runtime, but just like the general concept of it.
Thanks for that one, Carl. That's not a question that anyone likes to be asked. I won't go technical. I'll say a couple of high-level things without getting into the weeds. The first thing is that most people think they understand statistical significance, and in fact, they don't. And that's more dangerous than not understanding it. Because if you think you understand it and you apply that knowledge, but actually it's wrong, then you're going to make a lot of confident decisions that are actually wrong. That's not me saying so. That's scientists. And again, a lot of research has been done on that. The concept statistical significance. There's a paper, scientific paper that I'm going to forget the quote, but it says, there is no way to define statistical significance in a way that is both intuitive to understand and accurate. So I'm not even going to try and give the intuitive explanation. It doesn't exist. Whenever you hear somebody giving you an easy to understand intuitive explanation of statistical significance, it's bullshit, right? They don't know what they're talking about, because there is no way you can do it in a way that makes sense. Now, let's move away from stat sig for a moment into Bayesian probability, because it's the same concept, but it's two different schools of thought. And I fear I'm getting too technical here, but I'll pull it back. Most of the testing tools if you use Google Optimize, you use Convert, you use VWO, A/B testing, most of the tools you use are likely, all the ones I mentioned, are using Bayesian statistics, not frequentist statistics. Frequentist statistics is statistical significance. Bayesian statistics is a different way of looking at that same concept where you talk about probability. That's more intuitive. Now you can say, okay, 95% probability. If that's the figure you get in your test result, 95% probability. In Bayesian statistic, it actually means what you think it means. It means there's 95% chance that B is better than A. In frequentist statistics, statistical significance doesn't mean that. But so that's the starting point. Bayesian statistics, those tools you use, you can interpret in that way. The problem is that, as you said, people pause their tests too soon. So they get statistical significance within, or Bayesian probability. I'm using the terms interchangeably here. But they get stat sig within 2 days or 5 days or whatever, and they stop the test. Firstly, it's best practice to run it for 2 complete business cycles, so 2 full weeks, because behavior over the weekend may look different from during the day, during the weekday, times of day are different, and you want to get a full spread of that. So that's the first best practice. We certainly won't call any test if it hasn't run for 2 weeks, even if there's, and with the clients we work with often, there really is enough data to call it before then. But what you want to look at as well is the confidence intervals, or in Bayesian terms, and you'll find this in Google Optimize. If you look at the tool on the right, you'll find something called the credible interval. And that shows how much overlap, where's the camera? How much overlap there is between B, your variant, and A. And it gives you that spread. Yeah. Where it shows, okay, so the mean of A is there, the mean of B is there, and therefore you've got to win. But you can look at the overlap between the two, and if they still overlap, you don't want to call it, because there's a chance, and you can quantify that actually B is not a winner. You need to give it more time for that gap to widen between the two, and also for that interval to become, for that range to become smaller. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's why at a non-technical way to answer your question.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense to me. I'm just trying to think about a way to explain it like really understandable for the audience. I think this is the crux, right? This is the difficult part about taking such a complex concept of testing and significance and valid results and probability and trying to make it easy. So I will do my best in doing it into like 2-3 sentences. The way that you should think about it is that you cannot really test anything for, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, right? Maybe you test something and run it from Monday to Friday. Then you only have the user behavior of people in their day-to-day work, 9 to 5, and maybe in the lunch break, they sit on their phone and they are on the online store. And then you let a test run or an experiment run for those 5 days. And then you think, okay, yeah, the data looks good. I'm going to just pause it. I'm going to just end it. I saw an increase in conversion rate, and this was a good test. But then you're missing out on the Saturday and Sunday where the user behavior is completely different, right? Because now they are just, they are with their family, they're at home, maybe they sit in front of the computer, and it's a completely different environment to their workplace. So you're missing out of these 2 days of really, really important data. And that's just to kind of make one point of what's going on and what can happen if you end something too early or with not enough data. Again, we should probably just do like one whole interview talking about this concept to get it across better. But this is probably like the basic understanding that you should use.
Yeah, I mean, it is another discussion. And frankly, I think it's just geeks like you and I that find it really interesting. The rest of the world don't really care about that. And that's fine. You know, I think that's also, somebody needs to care about it. And somebody needs to understand this. But it doesn't have to be everyone. And certainly when you're working in a team, your manager doesn't give a damn about 95% and all. The manager wants to know, is it a win or not? Should we do it or not? And you got to make sure that your process behind that is rigorous, that you understand the concepts properly, that you're helping management to make the right decision. I tweet about this a lot, and there really is a huge amount to say about this. And I mean, there are people that like Ronica Harvey, for example, is a name that comes to me, who's written a book about statistics in experimentation and talks about this in great detail. But even when you listen to Ronnie, and I love listening to him, and he's I think, if not the best, one of the best people in the industry in terms of explaining this stuff. It gets pretty deep pretty quick, and you struggle to stay up to stay with him sometimes. So it does get pretty technical pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure. But let's do that in another video. For this session, to wrap it up, could you conclude everything we've just been speaking about, like the importance of making good decisions, the importance of not making bad decisions in the company fit?
May I repeat what I've said earlier?
Sure.
If there's one line that you take away from this, it is the following. When you look at your financial results next year, it's the outcome of every decision you make today, tomorrow, and so on. The more good decisions you make, the better it's going to look. The more bad decisions, the opposite picture. And that's the point of CRO. That's the point of testing. It's just a tool, along with many other tools, in the arsenal of CRO to help you to make those right decisions. You want to quantify not just the wins, you want to quantify the losses as well, because that's the value and that's where that curve comes from.
Perfect. Thank you so much for concluding that. Thank you so much for jumping on this episode, and see you soon in another video.
Carl, it's great to see you again.
Sweet.
Cheers, mate.